I spend a lot of time with my tools, and I like them to have options. If I could have it my way, I'd have a welding cart that had different bottle arrangements. It could have multiples, or one big one, where everything has its place. Every cable, the foot pedal, all the consumables, and I might as well throw in an adjustable quick disconnect. It could have dedicated shelves for the welder and water cooler. It would be really nice to have closed tubes to keep all the TIG rods clean. The deeper I go down this fabrication rabbit hole, when it comes down to building versus buying is becoming less and less of an option for me. That really only leaves me one choice. I'm Dylan, this is PunkerBuilds, and this is my Cyberpunk welding cart. I've heard one or two anecdotes over the years about a time before mass production, when a carpenter or sheet metal worker couldn't just pick up a toolbox from the hardware store. Having no other choice but to make their own, a toolbox could be an expression of their creator. As a demonstration of their craftsmanship, they might even help them land a job based on the quality of its construction. Now, I couldn't repeat any of these stories word for word. They might be a complete exaggeration, or maybe it was about lunchboxes. But whether it's true or not, it stuck with me as this romantic notion of pride in craftsmanship. It's this concept of carrying a functional bit of portfolio into a job interview to do the sales pitch for you. In this modern day, I can't compete with the low cost of a big ol' mass-produced rolling toolbox. But a welding cart, now that's something I can get on board with. So this is a sort of demonstration of skill while combining form and function. To add one last unnecessary layer to this whole project, I wanted to envision what that cart might look like in a dystopian cyberpunk future. There's always a time and a place for winging it, though if given the opportunity, I will always avoid improvisation. My personal projects go through the same steps that my work projects do. By drafting a project on the front end, I can build in tolerances where they're needed and gain an accurate cut list. It's a really methodical and streamlined process that takes all of the thinking out of the fabrication side. The struggle for usable space is constant. From small shops like mine to ones I've worked in with tens of thousands of usable square footage, space gets tight quickly. I have a hard time justifying anything that takes up floor space. One of my requirements for this project is that the top of the cart must be usable space. Despite this being topped with 1/8 inch thick steel, I don't intend to ever weld on top of this cart. It'll mostly be a place to keep my drawings, hand tools, and maybe my drill press on occasion. The speed advantage of processing all the material at the beginning more than makes up for the time to draft and plan it all out. I didn't have to remake a single one of these pieces. In my small space, it's important that I only set up for a task once and don't have to get all the tools back out again because I forgot to cut something or had to remake a part. If you don't have the budget for laser cutting, but you do have some time on your hands, a jigsaw, sheet metal blade, and a couple layers of foam can be a cheap and easy way to make some sheet metal parts. On a cautionary note, be sure to take breaks and listen to your body. It's rather unsuspecting, but the vibrations and constant kickback from jigsawing metal can be really intensive even in short bursts. Whenever I try and rush this process, for example by leaving burrs on edges to deal with after it's assembled, it's always more of a pain. It's just gonna be easier to deal with them while they're still flat. It's always nice to see this pile complete. These couple seconds of video are the result of hours and hours of planning and processing. If there's any members that need end caps, I weld those on first. It gets the pieces to their final size before I start pulling dimensions from an end. I need this miter to come out to 45 degrees. I've already got a little wiggle room here, but what I'm watching for is that if this joint is fully closed when I tack the inside of it, the tack will shrink and pull. If I don't accommodate for this pull ahead of time, I'm going to be fighting a losing battle to get this joint to close back in on itself to B45. Instead, I leave about a 1/16 of an inch gap on the side I'm tacking. Then once they're cool, I can pivot the angle on those tacks to where I want. Then I lock the joint in by tacking the far side. You want the weld to shrink to be the angle you want, not start at the angle that you want and have it pull out from there. Welds shrink while they cool. It's just the nature of the process, and some metals shrink more than others. You can't eliminate it, but you can accommodate for it. When considering order of assembly, I take note of the welds that will be more difficult to deal with later. I always try and tackle the hardest stuff first. Even while I'm attaching these upright assemblies, I'm still presetting these angles to be slightly greater than 90 degrees. So when the tacks shrink, it pulls to 90 degrees. I can adjust as needed by bending on those tacks, then lock in the other side. I bet most of you could relate to this in some way. If you work all day at a computer desk and the chair is just terrible, and the monitor is at the wrong height, your body is probably going to let you know. It's not ideal. Or maybe your work requires a lot of driving, but your cup holder is useless and the radio is always broken. When things don't work for us, it becomes painfully obvious. I have chased down a skill set that allows me to alter my surroundings. I get to choose what I surround myself with, and I want workspaces that are fun and engaging to be in. If that means having a welding cart with a cyberpunk twist, then I'm gonna dive right in. I'll be honest though, this started because I was trying to relax and play some Cyberpunk 2077, and I did not get far before I felt both inspired and compelled to put the game down and go build something. At the end of the day, I'm gonna spend a lot of time with this cart. It might as well be the right cart for me. Judging from my inability to sit down and play a solo video game to relax, it's safe to say I'm going to keep making overly complicated projects and filming them. If this kind of fabrication piques your interest, consider subscribing for more. There will be more. I love a good set of casters, but I don't like the typical way that they're just slapped on the bottom of the rectangle. Sure, it's cheap and easy, but I don't like the wasted space underneath them. I don't like how they mess with the center of gravity either, and they can make a tall, narrow thing very easy to tip. These runners act like outriggers, getting the casters as far out as possible, and since they're side-mounted, they help get the cart lower to the ground. That's the frame pretty well complete, so I'll move on to the work surface and cabinet portion of the build. This might not look like much, but this is a bunch of parts. It can be a bit daunting to get started, but it's important to just break it down into steps. Luckily, Past Me already prepped all of the parts, and they're neatly stacked in a pile waiting to be assembled. I'll start with the frame because everything builds off of that. Oh, and look, there's pieces with end caps. I'll do those first. If there's an object you spend a bunch of time with that you could improve, let me know what it is down in the comments below. I'd be curious if there's a lot of diversity here or if we're all just here for welding carts. Four bolts connect this upper frame to the lower frame. The work surface itself is directly supported by the upper frame. All of the sheet metal for the cabinet just hangs off of it and won't be a part of the structure. To disconnect the whole top, it'll just be those 4 bolts. The work surface is held on with flathead bolts and rivet nuts. The time has finally come and I get to use my brake. These pieces have just been begging to be bent. The main advantage to this style of box and pan brake is that the fingers are removable and rearrangeable. They can reach inside of things like a pan or a box shape, hence the name. Some of these reverse bends aren't possible to do on my brake, and I have to do them manually. Anywhere that 3 layers of steel stack up, one tab will need to get knocked back by the thickness of the sheet. If I don't do this, the outermost piece of steel won't sit flush. This brake might look like a beast to anyone unfamiliar with them, but it's actually fairly light duty. Hemming is the act of folding an edge over 180 degrees back onto itself. My brake really struggles with them. I can make it work, but it's not happy about it. This one is done in 3 actions. I want some edges bent at 90 degrees, but along a radius. This next task requires a little more effort, so I made some forming dies to hold the steel while I hammer it. The goal here is to not let the sheet wrinkle into an actual fold. The sheet needs to be incrementally compressed down onto itself. When it doesn't want to compress any further, I anneal the steel to soften it. But I am not going to beat myself up over a couple little wrinkles. It's literally just a welding cart. For just a welding cart, it'll do. This is a swage for the hydraulic press. There's a negative and positive forming side. One side is softer to lead in, and the other side is sharp to refine. This is so I can step in incrementally. The end result holds this LED neon strip. By taking notches out of very specific points, I can bend these tracks and have the LED strips still supported through a turn. The tracks allow me to embed the LEDs so that only the light portion is proud of the surface. The sheet metal gets mostly assembled with a bazillion blind rivets and the odd stitch weld. This is another style of track I made for the lights. This one pinches the LED strip to the cabinet. While fitting it, I slip shims in that are the same thickness as the LEDs to make sure that there's still room in there. Here's a perfect example of why I like planning. These pieces fit perfectly. There's no back and forth, they just work. The drawer has a deeper portion of it, and it might seem like a funky choice of shape, but it's actually notched around the welder, so these were the maximum depths I could get away with. The only annoying thing I did on this whole cart was using self-closing drawer slides in combination with a slam latch. The slam latch keeps the drawers open and needs an extra push to fully latch it. I've considered weakening the spring in the latch, but don't actually think I'll do anything about it. It won't ghost open, but it also won't actually self-close. This quick release latch for the bottles is one part I did improvise. I 3D modeled it after for the animation, but completely winged it initially. I've never liked loose bottles rattling around on a cart, so I made mine adjustable and it cams shut. The chain is bolted on the far side, and that's where I can fine adjust the length of the chain. All that's left to do is the final finishing of the cabinet, so I'll send the frame off to get painted professionally by the guys at work. Thanks, Jeff. It came out unnecessarily awesome and I love it. To finish the bare sheet metal, I get all of the marker off and Scotch-Brite the surface. I then use a paste finishing wax and buff it by hand with a shop towel. It's an easy finish to touch up, unlike the paint, which if it gets damaged, I can't do much about it. Wherever I could, I crimped the back of the light track onto the LEDs to stop them from pulling out too easily. I run the top light while it's on. It makes more sharp turns, and if it breaks halfway through, I want to know so I don't get to the end and have to start all over again because it snapped internally. To electrically isolate these wires from shorting out, I flood this void with hot glue and trim off the excess. It doesn't stick to the silicone strip, but it does grab onto the steel. With that, it's complete. Well, fingers crossed my welder doesn't die anytime soon. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this build and maybe learned a trick or two. Consider subscribing for my next project or check out some of my other ones while you're here. Cheers!